Well, I've written 3 books, as you may know, Growing Up Italian, Whatever Happened to Sunday Dinner, and My Story Continues. Uh, Most of what I write about, or much of what I write about in those books, is about my old neighborhood, the friends and the families who lived and grew with me in that neighborhood. They come alive for me when I write about them. I hope they come alive for you when you read about them. But to go a step further, in a moment of nostalgia, I thought I would like to go back to my old neighborhood to see what it looks like today, so I can show you what I'm writing about and then rekindle my memories of many years ago. In my 3 books, Growing Up Italian, Whatever Happened to Sunday Dinner, and My Story Continues, I write about my neighborhood. A lot of stories in the books are just about this neighborhood, and we're looking at the neighborhood right now. This is Wealth Avenue in Providence, Rhode Island, a street that I thought was terribly long when my mother sent me to the store to buy some bread or get something. But if you look in the distance on this street, you'll see a hill. And that hill is Armington Avenue, where my public library was and where I spent many hours listening to Story Hour and getting books to read. As I turn here, this is the famous, for me famous, 3-decker home. The home that my grandfather built almost 100 years ago. My grandfather, Vincenzo, and my grandmother, Domenica Troiano, lived on the 2nd floor. My brother and I lived on the 3rd floor with our parents, Peter and Anna Inicelli. And on the 1st floor was my Aunt Della, my Uncle Carlo, and their 3 children. The first story I wrote in the first book was about how my grandfather buried his fig tree in the lot next to this house. He bought the house and the lot next door so that he could have a garden. But every fall he buried the fig tree, and from the 3rd floor window behind me, that's where I sat and watched him dig a big hole to put the fig tree in the hole every fall, and then in the spring I watched him dig up the tree to savor his fruits. So there's our 3rd floor tenement, and that's the window I sat at when I was a kid. Okay, so this is the driveway to this home, but we never put any cars in the backyard because at the end of this driveway was a grape arbor. And that was an important place for the family in the summertime, especially under the grape arbor. And from that arbor, my grandfather harvested his grapes, and in the cellar of this house, he had a wine press, and he made his own wine. Most important to my grandfather was not only his house, but the piece of property that he bought next to the house, where this home sits now. Here there was a large garden with tomatoes and fig trees and peach trees and apple trees. And I can remember many a summer day sitting in that garden, picking a tomato off and sprinkling a little salt on that tomato and eating it. So here was his pride and joy. In addition to the home was this wonderful garden where this house sits today. One of the stories in my first book is about how my brother and my cousin, Bill, came out of that tenement house and walked over here, and each putting a hand on this firebox, pulled the lever. Now this is obviously dead now and it's not something people do, but when they pulled the lever in those days, in the 1950s, all the fire engines came to this neighborhood. There was no fire, it was a prank, and they quickly ran away and hid back in the house as everything dissipated. What's funnier about my brother and my cousin Bill pulling the fire alarm was that my cousin's father, Carlo, was a fireman. We're standing on Huron Street now, just around the corner. And this is where I played many a game with lots of friends. But my best friend lived in that 3-decker home there on the 3rd floor. His name was Dan, and I would stand at that fence and call him when I wanted him to come out to play. So this area was called Around the Corner. So Mom, I'll be around the corner today. 2 of my best friends also were Patty and Marie. Patty lived in this wonderful bungalow behind me where I played Spin the Bottle for the first time that I ever kissed a girl. And then in this house, Uh, Next door was where Marie lived, and behind me were the hills where we ran and played all kinds of games like capture the flag. It's a great place, just a great place. Behind me is the old library. It's now a house, but it was the Mount Pleasant Branch Library. And this is where I went to story hour, where I took out many books, but went to story hour and fell in love with the librarian. I once thought this building was huge, but it's not that huge. As happens with so many things, what you once thought was huge when you were a kid are now quite small. But this was the old Mount Pleasant Branch Library. Well, the Blessed Sacrament Church was just a couple of blocks away from where we just were, and the church was a very important part of my life. Here I received a First Communion and my first confirmation, but more importantly, in the basement of the church was the CYO organization, which was a social organization where we met other kids from around the neighborhood, where we had organized games and organized events, and a wonderful priest who helped us learn some of these things. I did not go to the school. I went to a public school. Because of that, I had to come to this school in after hours for my religious training, but it was a very important part of a life. If you can believe it, in the basement of this church was something called a minstrel show, and it was sold out for the 2 or 3 nights that the show was put on by the school, and neighborhood kids were part of the show. It might not be something you would do today because it's incorrect, but it was a lot of fun and a destination and something we looked forward to for the whole year, the minstrel show. The Castle Theater was our Friday night destination where we saw 2 movies. We were able to walk there from our neighborhood homes, and following the theater we went to the ice cream parlor next door. The theater now is a pizza restaurant. Although it does show film, it's not the theater that I remember. So my schools were Putnam Street School, the first one I went to, then Academy Avenue School, both within walking distance of the neighborhood that you just saw. And then when I came to the 7th, 8th, and 9th grade, I came to George J.West Junior High School, which is where we're standing now. This was again not too far from where I lived, though I had to walk up the hill to the school. We're standing near a couple of interesting structures. The one to my right is the boys' gym. On the other end of the school was the girls' gym. God forbid the boys and girls could ever be together in gym. But behind me, if you can see a pole there with a place for a sign, that was a sign that said George J. West Junior High School. I was on the student council in 1954, and the student council members came up here, and each of us took a shovel of cement to put in the hole to place that pipe in the hole for the sign. So that sign is at least as old as 1954. Another great place for me is George J. West Junior High School, and I write a lot about it in my 3rd book. A lot of what we did in this neighborhood was about games, was about being a hero, was about collective success. And one of the places I had success was here at George J. West Junior High School, and one of the successes was in this lot. The wall behind me was a critical piece, because here we played a game called fist ball, where you would throw up a rubber ball, hit it with your fist, and try to get a hit. And the hero was the guy who could throw the ball up, hit it with his fist, and hit that wall, which in my day as a kid seemed miles away, but today is here just a drop shot away. And one time I did hit the wall and I made a double. I didn't make a home run, but at least hitting the wall was my success in this particular yard. So here, just across the street from the George J. West Junior High School, is the George J. West baseball field, where I played many a day, both for the George J. West school team and all summer with my friends. So exploits. Two things happened to me on this field. I finally made the George J. West baseball team as a second baseman, and in the very first game, someone slid into me, broke my thumb, and I was out for the season. But the thing I remember the most, thinking it was miles away, was to stand there at home plate and to hit a home run over the left field fence. It looks like it was 400 miles away, but it's very close today. But in those days, at 14 years old, when you wanted to be a hero and you hit that fence or you hit it over the fence, you were a hero. So I took the neighborhood from down the hill to the junior high school here at George J. West, and that's what I write about in my third book, What Happened at George J. West.